Okay, so going to continue with our deity description video on the high god of Babylon, ancient Babylon, which is Marduk. So this will be, I think, part 4, and we're getting into the mythology, and literature part. We just got done with like his characteristics, different things like that. And we're going to start with the Enuma Elish, or the Epic of Creation here. The Enuma Elish, generally believed to have been composed in the Isin II period, details Marduk's rise to power as the king of the gods. There are similarities between the Epic of Creation and the Anzu myth, as well as other traditions related to the god Ninurta. That is true. The Tablet of Destinies is a key object in both myths, and Marduk uses largely the same weapons as Ninurta does. A ritual tablet mentions how the Epic of Creation would be recited and possibly reenacted during the Akitu festival. It's a spring festival. On the 4th day of the month of Nisanu, it's like the new year in the calendar, in the ancient lunar calendar. The epic starts off by mentioning Apsu and Tiamat. Here the oldest gods, and created a younger generation of the gods. However, Apsu was disturbed by their noisiness and decided to kill them. The god Ea, however, found out about the plot. Now, Ea is like Enki, the god Enki. He found out about the plot, and he kills Apsu and takes his splendor. Later, Marduk was born to Ea and Damkina, so that's his divine parents, and already at birth he was special. Tiamat then decides to wage war against the younger generation of gods, giving Kingu the Tablet of Destinies and appointing him as the commander. Marduk volunteers to do battle against Tiamat and defeats her. The world was fashioned from Tiamat's corpse, with Babylon as the center, and Marduk assumes kingship and receives his 50 names. The 50 names taken was based on the Anu, the An equals Anum godlust. The columnar arrangement removed and slotted in. Okay. One of his titles, Bel Matati, which means king of the lands, originally belonged to the god Enlil, who was conspicuously missing from the epic, except when he gave this title to Marduk. So, then the next one is Ludlul Bel Nemeki, which is also known as the Babylonian Job. The poem describes the narrator's suffering caused by Marduk's anger, causing him to lose his job and to experience hostility from his friends and family. Diviners were incapable of helping him, and his protective spirits and gods also did not come to help. He claims that nobody understood the actions of the gods, and despite the narrator's protests of innocence, and that he had always been pious to the gods and never abandoned him, he quickly became ill and was on death's bed. Then, in a series of dreams, he met a young man, an incantation priest that purified him, a young woman with a godlike appearance who came to say that his suffering had ended, and an incantation priest from Babylon. Afterwards, the narrator praises Marduk's mercy, which was the main point of the text, despite the expressions of Marduk's anger. Now, the next one is the Epic of Era. So, in the Era epic, the god Era, of course, is similar to the god Nergal. He's a god of war and pestilence. Era convinced Marduk to leave Isagil, that's his main temple in Babylon, and to go to the Netherworld, leaving Era to become king. Afterwards, Era wreaks havoc on all the cities and causes instability. How did he convince Marduk to leave and go to the Netherworld? Marduk came back and lamented the state of Babylon. Unlike the Enuma Elish, which championed Marduk as the bringer of peace and stability, Marduk is here the one who brought instability by leaving his seat, thus bringing darkness upon the world. He also indirectly brought war by yielding to Era. So the next one is Marduk's ordeal. Written in the Assyrian dialect, versions of the so-called Marduk ordeal text are known from Ashur, Nimrud, and Nineveh, using sceneries and language familiar to the procession of the Akitu festival. Here, Marduk is instead being held responsible for crimes committed against Ashur. And was subject to a river ordeal and imprisonment. Oh, wow. So, that's strange. The text opens with Nabu, that's Marduk's divine son, arriving in Babylon looking for Marduk, his father. Teshmetum prayed to Sin and Shamash. Teshmetum, or Teshmetu, is one of Nabu's consorts, divine consorts. Meanwhile, Marduk was being held captive. The color red on his clothes was reinterpreted to be his blood, and the case was brought forward to the god Ashur. The city of Babylon also seemingly rebelled against Marduk, and Nabu learned that Marduk was taken to the river ordeal. Marduk claims that everything was done for the good of the god Ashur and praise. Boy, this is an odd text because. And praise to the gods to let him live. After various alternate cultic commentaries, the Assyrian version of the Enuma Elish was recited, proclaiming Ashur's superiority. So, okay. However, despite the content, the Marduk ordeal was not simply an anti-Marduk piece of literature. At no point was Marduk actually accused of a crime, and the end of the text seems to suggest that the gods fought to get Marduk out by drilling holes through the door, which he is locked behind. Marduk also appeared in the curse section, so it is possible that the majority of the blame was put on the Babylonians for leading Marduk astray, while Marduk retains a position within the pantheon. While most attribute this text to Sennacherib's destruction of Babylon, one scholar suggests that the background could be the return of Marduk's statue to Babylon in 669 BC. All right, now the next one is Enmeshara's defeat. Enmeshara is an ancient Mesopotamian deity. Known from only one copy and with a badly damaged top half Enmeshara's defeat is likely composed in the Seleucid or Parthian era, so a very late text. Interesting. Structurally similar to the Enuma Elish. The text starts with Enmeshara and his 7 sons going against Marduk, who subsequently defeated them and threw them into jail with Nergal as the prison warden. The preserved portion starts with Nergal announcing Marduk's judgment to Enmeshara, that he and his sons would all be put to death. And Enmeshara laments about Marduk's terrible judgment and pleads with Nergal. Nergal replies, but the text unfortunately breaks off. Nergal is then shown to be escorting Enmeshara and his sons to Marduk. Who first beheads the sons, and Enmeshara's radiance was then taken and given to the sun god Shamash. Nabu was also given the power of Ninurta. Okay. Nergal those of Era, and Marduk took Enlil's power. Oh. Marduk, Nabu, and Nergal then shared the throne, which likely previously belonged to the sky god Anu. The gods were then assigned their cities, and a voice from heaven could be heard. A fish goat praised Marduk as the exalted lord, and the text ends with the gods gathering at Babylon. Huh. Very interesting text there. So that's a late text, though. So now we get into syncretisms. So the god Asalui. The earliest evidence of Asalui's syncretism with Marduk is Sin Edinum's prayer to Ninisina, where Asalui was called the king of Babylon. An old Babylonian text substitutes son of Eridu for lord of Tintir as a title for Asalui. Tintir being another attested name for Babylon. Oh, okay. I don't know if I've ever heard that. Oh, in Hammurabi's prayer to Asalui, he is clearly viewed as synonymous with Marduk. However, in a prayer for Samsu Iluna, Marduk and Asalui were mentioned as separate gods, suggesting that the syncretism was not yet fully established as canonical in the Old Babylonian period. It's also suggested that Johandi also suggests that keeping Marduk and Asalui separate was a deliberate act on the part of Samsu Iluna to reclaim authority over the southern cities, which were centers of rebellion during the early years of his reign. Summerfield suggested that the syncretism may have been due to both having a similar role as a god of incantations, or because Asalui was more well-known in southern Babylonia compared to Marduk, who was still a local god. Lambert also believes the syncretism to be a means to elevate Marduk to a more respectable position. Johandi proposes that Marduk and Asalui were identified for some other reason other than magic, and Marduk only became a god associated with magic after being syncretized with Asalui. The syncretism of Babylon and Nippur was in place from the Isin II period, and the names of the city walls were switched, with Imgur Enlil and Nimit Enlil in Babylon, while Imgur Marduk and Nimit Marduk were in Nippur. By extension, Marduk was also identified with Enlil, and in the Isin II period, Marduk was attested with Enlil's titles. Huh. Oh yeah, Marduk was often called the Enlil of the gods in the first millennium. They weren't. It wasn't like a. It wasn't a complete syncretism though. They were usually separate deities. Um, a statue of Marduk, conveniently named King of the Gods of Heaven and the Underworld, was placed in Enlil's sanctuary in Babylon, and Marduk receives the titles Bel Matati, King of the Lands, in the Enuma Elish. So, the previous patron deity of Borsippa was a god named Tutu. I can't say I actually ever heard of this deity. Tutu was a minor Mesopotamian god. The meaning and origin of his name are uncertain. Oh. Yeah, I'm not sure I ever... Well, Borsippa is Nabu's holy city. Although Hammurabi recognized Tutu's dominion as extending over Borsippa and Izida, Tutu became another name for Marduk after Hammurabi. That's interesting. But became a byname for Nabu in the first millennium. That makes more sense. Tutu was also a name for Marduk in the Enuma Elish. In the bird call text, a bird of Enmeshara calls that he sinned against Tutu, here meaning Marduk. So there's definitely a connection with the deity Tutu and Marduk, and also Nabu. And let's see. Well, okay. So that ends our deity descriptions on the god Marduk. Of course, I'll do more on Marduk in the future. We got like mythology and hymns to go over, things like that. But yeah, let me know your thoughts and comments about the high god of Babylon, Marduk, in the comments below. And I'll be back with more deity description videos here later, sometime later on. Yeah, let me know anything, any thoughts and comments you have about the god Marduk. Anything that you would like to add. And are there any devotees of Marduk out there? Definitely let me know that as well. And I thank you for watching the video if you've made it this far. And I'll be back with more here soon.